Sleep 2 Business Genius, Business History, Fact number 26 of 100 7-minute read. The Act that Protected Investors. Subscribe, like and share. In 1855, the British Parliament passed the Limited Liability Act. It was one paragraph of law, and it changed the economics of risk so fundamentally that it reshaped who could participate in commerce and what scale of enterprise was possible. By Sleep to Business Genius, Business History, Britain, 1855. The Limited Liability Act of 1855, one of the most consequential pieces of commercial legislation ever passed, giving investors the protection they needed to back ventures without risking everything they owned. Let your breathing slow, and consider what it felt like to invest in a company before limited liability existed. Before 1855, investing in a business in Britain meant accepting unlimited personal liability for its debts. If the company failed and its debts exceeded its assets, the creditors could come for everything you owned: your house, your savings, the clothes on your back. You were personally responsible, without limit, for the consequences of the business you had backed. This was not merely an inconvenience for wealthy investors. It was a fundamental barrier to the formation of capital. People of modest means, a schoolteacher, a shopkeeper, a skilled tradesman, might have savings to invest, but they could not risk total ruin. Even wealthy investors were reluctant to back ventures they could not personally supervise, because the downside was catastrophic. The result was a capital market that was far smaller, far more concentrated, and far more risk-averse than it needed to be. Unlimited liability did not just make investing risky. It made it irrational for anyone without detailed personal knowledge of a business's management to invest in it at all. Limited liability did not just reduce risk. It made large-scale capitalism possible. The political fight for reform. Britain 1830s 1855. The campaign to limit investor liability. The campaign for limited liability in Britain was long and contested. Opponents argued that it would encourage reckless enterprise by removing the personal stake that kept businessmen honest. If shareholders could not lose more than they had invested, what would stop company directors from gambling with other people's money? The objection was not unreasonable. It anticipated genuinely real problems that limited liability would eventually create. Supporters argued, correctly, that the practical alternative, unlimited liability, was already producing bad outcomes. Small investors were excluded from commerce entirely. Large investors formed private partnerships rather than public companies, limiting the scale of enterprise. The economy needed a way to aggregate capital from many small sources, and that required protection for small investors. Glowing star: the Joint Stock Companies Act 1856. The Limited Liability Act of 1855 was followed in 1856 by the Joint Stock Companies Act, which together created the modern framework for company formation in Britain. For the first time, any group of 7 or more people could form a limited company by registration, without needing a royal charter or Act of Parliament. The combination of easy incorporation and limited liability transformed the British economy. The number of registered companies grew from a few hundred in 1855 to tens of thousands by the end of the century. The law that spread around the world. The British model of limited liability was adopted rapidly by other countries. France passed similar legislation in 1867. The German states followed in the 1870s. The United States, whose state-level incorporation laws had been evolving in a similar direction, consolidated around similar principles. By the end of the 19th century, limited liability was the universal legal basis for corporate investment across the industrialised world. The results were extraordinary. The period between 1856 and 1914 saw an explosion of company formation, capital investment, and industrial development that transformed every economy it touched. The railways were completed. The great utility companies, gas, water, electricity, were built. The steel industry, the chemical industry, the electrical industry, all of them required capital investment at scales that only limited liability companies could attract. The Act of 1855 did not cause all of this, but it removed the legal barrier that would have prevented most of it. One act. One paragraph. Capitalism as we know it became possible. Tags: Limited Liability Act, Company Law, British History, Business History, Corporate Law, Investment History of Victorian Britain, Sleep Learning, Economic History. Sleep to Business Genius weaves 100 fascinating business history facts into soothing, story-driven narratives. This is fact number 26 of 100. Part of 100 Facts About Business to Fall Asleep To, available as a full narrated video on YouTube.